You're listening to the Shared Security Podcast with Tom Eston and Scott Wright, exploring the trust you put in people, apps, and technology.
Hosted by Scott Wright, the Streetwise Security Coach, and Tom Eston, Penetration Tester and Ethical Hacker. And sponsored by Security Perspectives, your source for tailored security awareness training and assessment solutions. We bring you stories, advice, and tips to help you make better risk decisions because nobody else can make them for you.
Episode 48 for November 23rd, 2015. If you can't replace your fingerprints, maybe you shouldn't use them for authentication.
Welcome to the Shared Security Podcast, episode 48, with your hosts, Scott Wright and Tom Eston. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing great, thanks, Tom, and nice of you to offer to introduce the podcast today. That was a nice touch.
You're welcome.
We're probably confusing people.
Yes.
They're spilling coffee all over the place. And what the heck? Anyways, no, that's good to talk to you again. And has there been a shortage of activity in the shared security world these days?
No, there's never a shortage. And, I think just with some of the topics we're going to be discussing in the podcast today, it kind of lends itself to the fact that it's just growing. Internet of Things and privacy. It's just it's a good time to be in this industry. Yeah.
I don't think we're worried about our jobs at the moment, but I think people have a lot to worry about, though. So maybe we should do a quick run through the topics for today.
Yeah, let's do that. So first topic is we're going to be talking about a hacking tool that has been swiping encrypted credentials from a certain password manager that we all know and love.
Well, I think we're going to learn something about that, but we'll have to temper the dire warnings and see what happens there. I guess how bad really is it?
Yes.
Then we'll move on to some really interesting discussions of fingerprints, and a lot of people think passwords are on their way out. We really have to go biometrics. So this is a really good story I think we're going to cover that sort of brings a lot of maybe not so well known facts around biometrics and fingerprints in particular.
Yeah, this is a good one. And there's some areas that even I kind of struggle with I for one was a big proponent of biometrics. So we'll see if that has changed at all.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting. And what about closed circuit television cameras?
Yeah, so closed circuit television cameras, kind of fall under the same genre of the Internet of Things. So there's been some recent chatter about the vulnerabilities in those cameras and how they could be used for a botnet and even more.
Yeah, I mean they've been in use for a long time, and we've heard many sort of horror stories about them, but it's kind of interesting to revisit and see how it all reflects on the Internet of Things and how it's going to go in the future.
Exactly.
And what else do we have?
So predicting the future of technology. So, we always kind of mention this on the podcast and on our Facebook and Twitter page about, new technology coming out or new technology that's being thought about, right? Or even starting to be developed. So we have some interesting, maybe some twists on tech that we're currently using now, but just some things to be aware of maybe in the next coming years that we're going to have to be talking about on the podcast.
Yeah, things are changing fast, and a lot of us want to try and at least make sense of it all, if not try to outthink them, but that's going to be tough.
Always good to get ahead of things.
Yep.
Sure.
And then we have the teen Instagram star quitting social media.
Yes. I'm done. I quit. I'm out. Right?
Sort of.
Drops the mic and you're done, right? Is it that easy?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's that easy. So we'll talk a little bit about this. This was kind of all over the internet a couple weeks ago, and just wanted to recap and maybe talk about what it's really like to leave social media.
Or can you? Is it like Hotel California?
Maybe.
Cool. And of course, another little side topic we can talk about is Tor. Maybe we can get into a little bit of discussion of how it works.
Yeah, just a little bit of discussion maybe, for our listeners. Maybe if you're not familiar with what Tor is, the Tor proxy, you've probably heard it in the news, being talked a lot recently with things with terrorist attacks and with Edward Snowden and all these other things. We'll give you just a very quick primer on what it is, what it's all about, and how it might affect you.
Excellent. Great. Well, that's a jam-packed show there. So I guess we should jump in and get started. So let's talk about the hacking tools that are used for swiping our passwords from our password managers. Just when we thought we had gotten a hold of security for passwords.
Well, passwords are, we'll talk about biometrics in a second, but passwords are here to stay for quite a while. And, we've been Scott and I have been big proponents of using password managers to store all your passwords, to secure them. And it is in general a really good thing to do, and that we're not changing or wavering on that stance at all. But what we want people to understand is that there's still, hackers that are going out there and looking for vulnerabilities, even in these password managers, or they're looking for ways that they can grab that passphrase that you use to unlock your database. And of course, once you have that passphrase, all your passwords are exposed. So unfortunately, with password managers, there is that one single point of failure. But I will say it's still better than writing them down, still better than using one password for every single site and everything that you access. But this article here kind of shows you there's this tool that some researchers released called KeyFarce, kind of takes pun at the KeePass program. That basically, if KeePass is open on a machine, it uses some, injection techniques into memory where it can pull that mastered password and any other data that's really stored in computer memory, and find the clear text version of those. So, this is nothing new, right? There's been attacks like this for years where, attackers will look for things within your memory. Mm-hmm. Now it's just another way where they know that you have a password manager open. And again, it only happens if you have the password manager open. So we can talk about maybe some controls that are in KeePass to help prevent keeping your database open all the time. But again, it's something that we need to be aware of.
Yeah. It's definitely something that I think people should be aware of. But I think I also want to sort of temper things by saying, if your machine has the malware that allows this to happen, you could just as easily have the malware that could keylog any password you enter into any website. So
that's right.
You're really, there's no easy solution to securing everything, right? You may think your password manager keeps you safe. You may think your antivirus keeps you safe. But in the end, in my view, it's all about trying to reduce the risk of getting a malware infection or reduce the risks of having vulnerabilities in your system and your practices. So right. I think that there is a danger and people should be aware of it, but I don't think it's a high panic situation from this particular point of view.
Exactly. And, if an attacker has full control of your computer and they're able to read your memory on your computer, you've got larger issues. Because, most likely your computer is going to be used as a botnet and it's going to be used for maybe illegal activity. Who knows? And that's where we talk about awareness and
exactly. And I think that what are people going to do to counter this particular risk? Well, you can't really do too much from a user point of view, but most of the time having a password manager mitigates so many types of risks. You can use it to make sure that every password you have on every site is different. That reduces your risk by a ton, right? So all these kinds of things that are benefits of password managers shouldn't be outweighed by the fact that there is a piece of malware out there that could potentially dump all your passwords out.
That's right. Yeah. Benefits greatly outweigh the disadvantages for sure.
Yep. So let's just keep it all in perspective.
That's right.
Cool.
So what about those fingerprints? Aren't those secure?
Uh, of course they are. Well, I mean, no. Well, I used to think so too. And as you said, I think we all kind of were interested or impressed when Apple came out with the Touch ID, right? That
Hmm.
lets you authenticate to your phone with your fingerprint. And again, there's people who have been saying passwords are dead for a long time, and or they're just not going to be viable in the future. And so, what are our options? Well, the biggest one that most people turn to is biometrics, like fingerprints, iris scanners, facial recognition. And I just remember when first time I saw the movie Minority Report, I thought, oh, yeah, you can rip somebody's eye out and use it on an iris scanner, and you can't really
Yeah.
revoke it. So it's it does have its challenges. But this one article from Hackaday does a really nice job of explaining the weaknesses in using fingerprints for authentication.
Yeah, yeah, and it's probably the first article that I've read that really has kind of a well-researched look at kind of the negative aspects of fingerprints, and um, it's kind of eye-opening. Let's just put it that way.
It is, yeah. I mean, I wrote it here, and I think we'll have it in our show notes. But there's sort of four major takeaways. The article is great; it's several pages long. Goes into lots of elegant descriptions about each of these reasons why fingerprints are not great. But the bottom line is, number one, your fingerprints really aren't very secret. Right?
Hmm.
You leave them everywhere.
Yes.
And in fact, high resolution cameras can now take pictures of people's hands from quite a distance and uh, get a reasonably good image of your fingerprint. They can also be easily reproduced and used to impersonate you. The article explains exactly how the guy was able to reproduce fingerprints on latex uh, fabric, which is pretty much like skin, and it could be used at will. They can also be, your fingerprints can't really be revoked or changed, like I said in the Minority Report case.
Yep.
Uh, the only way you can change your fingerprint is to chop off your finger and put another one on, but that's not going to happen. So, in fact, they reference the breach from the Office of Personnel Management, the OPM,
Yeah.
in the States, where a lot of several million fingerprints were taken. And if those were being used for authentication, never mind the privacy
Right. Yeah.
impacts of that, but if those were being used for authentication in any way, then they're no longer valid, right? Because they've been exposed and you can't do anything about that. And then finally, the one I really hadn't thought much about, but it makes a lot of sense, is that fingerprints are usually stored in a database, and the way that the databases work is they're trying to search for a close match
Right.
to the print itself. And as you know, every time you put your finger down on something, it sort of creates a slightly different variation
Hmm.
of your fingerprint. It's not 100% identical every time. And so you have to have algorithms that can compare many at a time. And in a traditional password, security mechanism, you're hashing every password so that each one is only accessible, or you can only check one at a time.
Right.
And you can't really do that in the context of a fingerprint authentication system. You're trying to check against a million other fingerprints to see if it matches one of them. And that part of the scheme that is kind of a weakness. It basically is a built-in vulnerability to the whole system.
Yeah, and that's something that I guess we don't think too much about and that's how most people understand, I mean, from the end user perspective, a lot of people will think that when you're putting your finger on a fingerprint reader, it's actually taking a picture of your fingerprint, and that's not true. It's just creating a hash, which is just a mathematical representation of that. But then you think, well, that's got to be the same hash every single time, and it's kind of eye-opening to think that that's not true.
Yeah.
It's kind of as close as it gets.
Yeah.
And it talks about, I think, the security of those hashes, right? So, which we know can be secured through better encryption with salts and other things that they use. But at the end of the day, I mean, that could possibly be cracked and replicated and put into another system, and
Yeah.
it is kind of scary to think.
Yeah, I
What
mean,
do you
there
do
are
with
ways
that?
it's obviously secured with it's an encrypted database probably that most of these things use, hopefully. But the fact that when it becomes decrypted, it has to be used for it to be usable, everything has to be decrypted for it to be able to search and match on these things. And that's where the weakness is. And I didn't even agree when I first read that section heading saying it's not hashed or can never be hashed. And I'm going, well, that's not true. You can always take those metrics and hash them. Well, yeah, but then you can't search on them in terms of close matches. So it's a really well explained article. So not to dwell on it too much, but I think it's worth reading.
Yeah, I agree. And it will be interesting to see how that technology evolves. I mean, we've seen that now in our iPhones, and really any kind of modern smartphone that you buy now has a fingerprint reader.
Even laptops, right? Some of the HP laptops had little fingerprint scanning things.
Exactly. So we're seeing them, pretty much everywhere now. But and there's been vulnerabilities, right? I think when the first if you remember when the first iPhone that came out with the Touch ID, they found a vulnerability within like 2 days.
Well, that's I think it was the guy that wrote the article, right?
It was.
That did so
I believe so. Yeah,
he knows what he's talking of.
Exactly. So it's good. It'll be good to follow up on that and see how that technology evolves.
Yeah, and it's given me more confidence to have a position on this issue.
Yes, exactly.
Great. Okay, so let's move on to botnets in your own backyard.
Yeah, well, we'll spend a lot of time on this, but just wanted to mention, a lot of times we don't think about security cameras and all the different variations of closed circuit TV cameras that are used for physical security across your buildings, people's homes. I mean, these things are everywhere. And ever since they went IP enabled, that really was an Internet of Things evolution, right? That was, something I remember, back in 2007, 2008, when we started seeing this convergence of physical security devices and controls into the networked world. All of a sudden, all this stuff became networkable, and they had IP addresses, and just like all these other devices, they lacked security, right?
Yeah.
So now the same goes for these cameras that are up there. In this one article just talked about an attack where, it was called an HTTP flood attack, where you could potentially take a camera down, or you could turn it off, or make it do something that it wasn't designed to do. And that's a pretty big security issue from a physical standpoint. And it's, again, because of kind of the vulnerabilities that are just inherent in this type of technology. And the article is a little bit technical, but at the end of the day, it goes back to these vendors. How are they securing these devices, and how are they, fixing vulnerabilities that are reported to them? Because this could be, a pretty big security issue.
Yeah, it's really an interesting story. At first, I thought, CCTV, that's old news, right? But it's when you look at what people are doing with it's like herding CCTVs.
Yes.
Somebody's captured a whole bunch of them to create a botnet, and they use them for creating denial of service attacks and things you'd never really imagine. I mean, yes, you can use any kind of a device to do that, but to do it with a whole class of device like CCTVs and just say, okay, we're going to turn this into an attack vector.
Yeah. So imagine a company that has, let's just say, a lot of these cameras deployed, and an attacker decides to use their own cameras against them, right? Mm-hmm. And attack their network, right, through their own cameras. I mean, it's just a weird, it's a crazy concept to think of, but entirely possible.
Yep. It actually, while I'm on the topic, just let people know I've been reading a really good book called Invasion of Privacy it's a fiction book by a guy named Ian Sutherland, I think, from the UK. And it actually has a lot of webcam technology security stuff in it, which is cool. The whole story, I think, is really excellent, well written, good plot, and I'm not through it completely yet, so I don't know how it ends. But it does make you think about the privacy and security issues of just having cameras on the web.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's good. Yeah, we'll have to put it in the show notes, the link. I'm very interested in that book.
And so let's get a little more eclectic and look at the future of technology.
It's getting towards the end of the year, so it's about time we start putting
our top 10 list.
Together.
No.
Yeah, no, we're not doing that. Yeah, so this article, which we'll have in the show notes, is about the future of things, and this is really forecasting what holds in the future in terms of technology and the Internet of Things. And I really like this graphic, which kind of it starts from 2014 and goes all the way up to 2020, and talks about some things that kind of these futurists really think are going to happen. And I have to agree. I think they're pretty much on track of what I think will be in the near future. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I think it's it's always difficult to predict the future, and sometimes what I sort of observe is that a lot of things progress more quickly than you'd imagine, and a lot of them progress a lot more slowly than you'd imagine. But it's a timely article because I just had finished reading a book called Flash Foresight by Daniel Burrus, who's you call him a futurist, and he actually consults and helps companies envision what they should be doing next based on what technology, how technology is changing. And he has a bit of a formula that I think makes it a little easier to envision and sort of validate what's in this graph, because everything happens for a reason. And he's got a few different factors. One is the increasing speed of computers, the increasing bandwidth capabilities of networks, and I think the decreasing size of anything electronic, basically. And sort of, I think it's those three factors that, if you look at it, the way things will evolve. And it's interesting because if you look at what he calls hard trends versus soft trends, you can actually start to see, oh, okay, I can understand why computers are going to combine with other types of technology in the future. And in reality, I think over the next couple of decades, pretty much everything except rocks will have computers in them. So just a matter of which ones come first.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm really fascinated with some things they talked about in this article too, like with holographic television, what they're predicting in 2020, right? And having full robotics and automobiles and defense systems. I mean, we have some of that already now, right? I mean, we have, Teslas that can drive themselves. That's only going to increase, I think, in the next coming years. And of course, the security risks and privacy issues are just going to compound with any of this new technology.
What I think is also really interesting here is, if you look at historically, a lot of the major technology evolutions that have occurred over the last 100 years have been driven by military research and development, right?
Yeah.
So, I would think in most cases that would mean you'd have an element of security in it. But look at the internet, right? Which was developed also as a military project, but has no security inherent in it. But the idea of who's driving it now, like, look at Tesla, look at Google, right? They're doing the self-driving cars, and that's not really coming from the military angle. So, is it better for security, do you think?
I don't know. I guess time will tell. I just wonder what the angle is. If you're talking about defense, will that be exploited by? Is it researchers, or is it by terrorists, or?
Yeah, I mean, the threat environment is changing too, right? I mean, when the internet was developed, it really wasn't. There weren't any threats on the internet because it didn't exist. But these days, I think everything, as we've talked about before, anything you develop that has a computer and a wireless card in it has to be built as if it was going to be used maliciously.
Right.
Somebody's going to take it over and try to do something you didn't want done with it.
Of course. Everything will be broken and hacked.
We're doomed, in other words.
We're doomed, right? We're not all doomed.
Oh, okay. I'll take your word for it.
just this girl that quit Instagram.
She's doomed. No,
she's doomed. No, okay.
This is a long story. I guess this was a teenager. I don't know how old she was. 15.
No, she's 18.
18. Okay.
Her name is Esna. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Asena, something like that. I don't know. She is a self-proclaimed YouTube star or Instagram star. Has thousands and thousands of followers.
Except
she
for
came
Tom
out.
and
except for us, right? She came out one day and said, I'm quitting social media. It's ruined my life. And she put up this big teary video and said, I'm done. And, a lot of people picked this up as, hey, great, 18-year-old girl kind of comes out against the big, social media machine, and she's against the grain, and, she's inspirational and all these things. And I kind of took a little step back, and, I read a couple comments on Facebook talking about, well, she's really not quitting social media because what she ended up doing was creating another website which had her new YouTube videos of her, I'm so against social media, it's so bad for you, it's ruined my life, and all these other things. But I find it kind of ironic that YouTube is a form of social media. So if you've completely dropped social media, you're still using it to promote, this new you.
But not really new.
But not really new. Right. And I just find that, and it's something to really think about in terms of how I guess we all use social media, and when you use anything or too much of a good thing, right, becomes kind of an addiction, and we lose track of at times our lives and other things because things are so accessible, and we're so in tune to Facebook and all these other things in our lives. And I think it's just a lesson, right?
Yeah.
It's a lesson learned.
I think what's really interesting about the story is that the original point of the story was that not so much that she was too much social media, but she was actually creating something that wasn't real in her social media account. In fact, she had been posting pictures of herself that she was creating in a way that I think was just intended to get more followers or more likes, right? And so she would spend hours and take hundreds of pictures of herself before she got that one perfect picture that made it look like she was just casually looking great or whatever. And that was her admission, was that was all fake, that she had spent so much time sort of deceiving people about how easy it was and how good her life was. And so when she broke that mold, the whole story really was, don't be so fake. But all that to say, she's using social media once again to get that message out, which is kind of an interesting twist. I mean, why not really? But will she end up falling into the same trap again is the question, getting driven by the likes and comments.
I think she already has, because her page is already promoting, she's going to have a special product line and t-shirts and all these other things.
But that's just the capitalistic way, though. That's not anything dangerous.
Well, no, it's not dangerous, but it does kind of distort her message of,
authenticity.
What she's really trying to promote. And I don't know. It's definitely controversial. I mean, good for her that she's able to do that and change her life. But it just kind of make me reflect on, I think my own personal usage of social media and how it's so ingrained in my life, and when it's good to pull back, and
the way I look at this one is she's just starting over, but maybe not in such a hardcore way, right? It's more traditional social media because she now has a name for herself and she can leverage it, which is fine. But you're right; it's still probably exaggerating in some ways. What you have to in order to sell this stuff.
Exactly. Yep.
Cool.
All right. So Tor,
the onion router.
The onion router. Yes. So you may have heard Tor being mentioned. Maybe some of our audience maybe you've used Tor. Maybe you are curious to know more about it. Well, we'll give you a quick little primer on it. Don't spend a whole lot of time on it. If you want to know all the technical details, obviously we'll have some good links for you. And Tor really stands for the Onion Router. And it was actually developed by the U.S. Navy.
Once again, the military, right?
Which I find kind of ironic.
It is ironic.
Yeah. So, it really is there to let's just say, disguise your identity by moving your internet traffic across these different servers, and it encrypts all that along the way. So the idea is that anyone that tries sniffing or recording that traffic, they're not going to know what they call which node you're coming from. So it kind of anonymizes that in a way. But of course, it's not truly anonymous. One of the issues with Tor is that there have been some federal agencies and state-sponsored governments, won't name any names, that have been known to create exit nodes and on their own and collect some of that traffic. So one of the things with Tor is you can become one of those nodes yourself and help spread the network and distribute traffic. But one of the challenges with that is that your IP address is usually linked to that exit node. So if the federal agency or whoever starts knocking on your door and you have one of these nodes, there's been some cases where they can, find out, who's running these nodes, and then eventually, with enough time and research, eventually get to you, right? With enough time, money, and resources.
Yeah.
So
I think the exit node problem is probably the biggest problem of Tor from a confidentiality point of view, whether it's the military or other government departments or just the average Joe running an exit node as a server. Can you trust them, not to do things with your traffic once it comes out the end that's decrypted?
Exactly. So, and it's got a lot of good purposes, especially for people in foreign countries that they have, in communist countries and other things, dictatorships and others, they're trying to get the word out about, political activism and other things. It's been used for that, and people that maybe they're maybe necessarily doing illegal activity, but maybe they're doing something a little more anonymous on the internet, could be used for that. But of course, it's also used by criminals, and
there's the irony, right? The criminals using it because it was developed by a U.S. military.
That's right. So, you've heard about the Silk Road drug trading black market that was busted about a year ago. I think the FBI in the United States busted that down. But, that Tor was being used for that because you can host certain sites too.
Tor services, is it called?
Tor services, where basically it's like you can set up your own webpage and internet site that's only accessible through Tor. And so they kind of call that the dark net, right? So if you've heard the name the dark net, that's kind of part of that. Is it's not easily accessible on the regular internet that we know, but using something like Tor, you can access these kind of secret sites and other things like that.
Yeah, and the story of the Silk Road is really interesting. I don't know if I mentioned it on our previous podcast or not, but Trend Micro has an office here in Ottawa, and they invited me to a showing of the movie called Deep Web, which is the story of Silk Road, a documentary basically, much of it done by a Wired writer, Andy Greenberg? I can't remember.
Yeah.
And really interesting story from the beginning of what happened with Silk Road, how it was taken down, and the court case and criminal proceedings against Ross Ulbricht, the guy that apparently started it. It's a really interesting documentary if you get a chance to see it. I'm not sure where you can actually get it, but we had a private screening of it with a panel. I was on the panel at the end of it, just answering and discussing questions around the legitimacy of the legal processes that were used to take him down, and of course the problem of these types of dark sites and what happens on them, how do you police them, etc. So it's really interesting whole underground world, basically.
It is, and we'll have some good links in the show notes on Lifehacker had some really good articles that if you're interested in learning more about it, you can check that out.
Excellent. Yeah, it's definitely worth you learning about, because I have a feeling we're going to be probably using Tor more just for legitimate things like whistleblowing and privacy advocacy.
Right.
There's a lot of legitimate uses for something like Tor, and so you have to balance, what you can do for the good versus what the bad guys can do with it.
That's right.
Cool. So, any other discussion points, announcements?
The only thing I was going to mention, I was just recently featured in a free ebook from Fortinet, and the name of it is called Securing Your Network and Application Infrastructure, where I talk about social engineering and some application security attack vectors.
Awesome.
So
Cool.
I'll put a link in the show notes for that if you're interested in downloading that. It's a pretty good short read, yeah, feel free to pass that along.
I just was wondering, we mentioned a few episodes ago there was a series about privacy from The Guardian. Has that progressed? Have you seen any? I think I've seen 2 episodes of it, but I don't know. Has it gone further?
I'll have to look. I'm not sure either, but that's a good question.
We should try and bring that up next time and see where they are. I think it was a 5-part series, and I
don't know
if it was completed yet or not.
We'll definitely get back to our audience on that.
Excellent. Well, I don't have any other announcements other than the fact that Security Perspectives, we may have a new website coming soon. So that's exciting for me. But we just to give a little background on what I do, I'm Scott Wright. I'm a security, what do you call it, cybersecurity awareness, assessment, and education consultant. That's what I do a lot of the time with private and public sector clients. And Tom, what do you do for a living?
So I am the manager of Vericode's penetration testing team. So Vericode is a application security company, cloud provider, lots of different great tools.
Excellent, cool. And I follow you guys too, and I see lots of great posts on Twitter and
awesome,
all over the place. And Tom and I have been doing this since 2009.
2009.
And we have our 50th episode coming up. We're gonna have try and do something really amazing or at least something fun.
It'll be like a big birthday party.
Yeah. So if you have any ideas of what we can do to celebrate our 50th episode,
that's right,
that would be much appreciated. So you can send an email to feedback@sharedsecurity.net, or you can call 613-693-0997, leave a voicemail, and we will do our best to respond.
That's right.
So I think that's it for today, and we're going to try and do this again in a couple of weeks. And thanks everybody for joining us, and hope to see you next time.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.